Hello everyone, and welcome to our St. Thomas the Apostle Church here in Norwalk, Connecticut, to the next episode of our series of lectures, talks on philosophy and Catholicism, Jesus Meets Aristotle. Several years ago, I was blessed to be able to go to celebrate the sacrament of First Holy Communion for my niece. And it happened so that the sacrament was celebrated in the city of Brussels in Belgium, in the church of Notre Dame de Chapelle. I guess you can translate it into Our Lady of the Chapel. Beautiful Gothic church in the section of Brussels that now is run by the Polish Oblates missionaries. And I had an opportunity to see something that I wanted to see for many, many years, a resting place of a very famous Dutch-Flemish painter, Renaissance painter, Pieter Bruegel the Elder. In that church is his epitaph, monument of his death. And Pieter Bruegel the Elder is famous for many things, of course, but over 40 paintings, in addition to some sculptures and sketches, survived, scattered all over the museums of the world, and even here in National Gallery in Washington, D.C., you can see some of his art. And therefore, what you see next to me is our own reproduction of one of the Pieter Bruegel's famous paintings that he painted shortly before he died, called Blind Leading the Blind. I always wanted this painting to remind me that whatever I do with you, my friends, with my parishioners here of St. Thomas Parish, children, teenagers, is not related to that painting. In other words, that painting is not the allegory of me blind leading the blind. And that is why maybe in those series of lectures, Jesus Meets Aristotle, we want to broaden our horizons a little bit. We want to talk about the potential of the treasury of the intellectual and, yes, religious also, vault of our tradition. We want to talk about and address some burning issues of the 21st century through the lenses and research of many, many critical thinkers that lived before us and left rather huge legacy to be rediscovered and maybe even employed again in the 21st century. You might remember very well that last couple of episodes we tried to answer ourselves a question regarding the definition of the human being, human person. Who am I? Therefore, we have decided that today, during our lecture of Jesus Meets Aristotle, we will try to bring a little bit closer to the American audience, otherwise rather unknown to English-speaking world, French philosopher Gabriel Marcel. Gabriel Marcel hails from rather rich treasury of the existentialist movement, especially of the French-speaking existentialist movement, but then yet he very consciously decides not to associate himself with the description of it. He would rather prefer to be called Neo-Socratic, because he does not leave for us a systematic school or system. He rather, like Socrates, tries to help us to understand, to give birth to our own ideas, our own critical thinking about who am I? What is my purpose in this life, in the universe, instead of following very cold and very formal, and then also sometimes very alien to the human being philosophical systems. Gabriel Marcel distinguishes between two: primary reflection, which is mostly analytic, it's all the sciences and everything we can know, analyzing the object of inquiry. But he says also the secondary reflection exists, more of a synthetic reflection that gives us much deeper insight into the reason and the fact of who am I. In other words, I do have body, but also I am. I am alive. I share everything I can think of with the world of nature, but also what I share with the world of nature is life. Through such reflection, very complex yet achievable, Gabriel Marcel proposes to his listener, to you and me, something that he himself calls new metaphysics of hope. Marcel, like Kierkegaard, is in the school of criticism of all the idealistic systems of 18th and 19th century, especially the criticism of absolute idealism of Wilhelm Hegel, where a thought, my mind, is reality and even absolute, God, and therefore the thinking process is the process of co-creating with God, but then yet that absolute eventually, like sponge, absorbs the subject. Subject becomes the part of the absolute, and therefore I am God. And criticism of such a movement, absolute idealism, is a common denominator of the existential movement of the positive, very creative, and maybe even Christian and Catholic school. And then Gabriel Marcel realizes very quickly in his philosophical inquiry something about very broken world we live in, and then about the functional person in it. In other words, for Gabriel Marcel, what is important is my existence, is that I live, I cry, I laugh, I am sad, I am happy. Gabriel Marcel stresses that what drives me, human person, and how I can realize myself, drama of the human person, is in exigence, or in other words, very extreme or critical situations. Those moments in one's life, although might shake me very much, they help me to realize that I am finite, that I have the expiration date, that I was born and I will die. And then reflection goes, would everything that I possess, my physical body, yes, for sure, but what about my mind, my consciousness, or my immortal soul, would die with me or will live forever? And you see, such inquiry, philosophical inquiry of Gabriel Marcel leads him eventually to a conversion to the Catholicism, Catholic faith, by the age 40. When he makes that decision to become a Catholic, employs right away his own experience of the Holy Spirit into the inquiry about human being, human person, who am I? And therefore, realization of my own human spirit, my own potential, and even showing such realization to the world around me, to the other, to be an object of another's epistemology, inquiry about who am I, becomes more complex when I employ the very subtle categories like emotions, love, or even spirit. And on top of this, application of the revelation, and something that even systems, philosophical systems of ancient Greece, Middle Ages, Enlightenment, and contemporary philosophies call absolute, how that absolute interacts with me. What defines man, Gabriel Marcel says, are his exigencies, critical or extreme situations that we face in our lifetime. And I would like to quote from one of the Gabriel Marcel books, Metaphysical Journal, and then hopefully we'll understand better what he means by such critical situations. Being is or should be necessary.
It is impossible that everything should be reduced to a play of successive appearances, which are inconsistent with each other, or, in the words of Shakespeare, to a tale told by an idiot. I aspire to participate in this being, in this reality, and perhaps this aspiration is already a degree of participation,
however rudimentary. And that's the essence of how Gabriel Marcel understands you and I, being. It's not only a physical entity, material body. It's not only mind, emotions. It's the very human drama of here and now, purified, sharpened, or maybe even hurt very much by so-called exigencies, extreme situations, critical situations in our life. Those situations, those extremes that I sometimes don't have control of, show me real fiber, what I am made of. And such understanding of existentialism, of philosophy, is so important to Gabriel Marcel. He would rather incentivize us all to be philosophers in that tradition of Socrates, Socratic philosophy, helping one another to realize the best of our potential, intellectually and physically also, instead of following someone's opinions about us or this world. And here you see comes the beautiful school of phenomenology. That's how Gabriel Marcel does his homework, his fascination with Edmund Husserl and the method of putting everything in parentheses and inquiring myself, yourself, about the subject or object of inquiry. That phenomenological reduction helps Gabriel Marcel to somehow detach subject from absolute idealism of object that eventually, like that sponge, you see, absorbs the subject, and there is subject no more. I dissolve in some sort of absolute, or I become absolute or God. Gabriel Marcel makes those distinctions here also in a way of addressing problem and mystery. And that implies the very notion of participation. Unlike problems, any given problems, mysteries are not solved by solutions. You know, with the problem, we keep it at hand, at bay, and we try to come up with solution to fix it and forget about it, hopefully. But the mystery is something different. It demands my involvement. Would every mystery ever will be solved? Who knows? But my very own anticipation, participation, and solution for the mystery is called life, my involvement, my growing up, employment of my faculties, but also my spirit. And on top of this, help from revelation, the sources that don't necessarily belong to me, and then yet are part of the absolute. And my friends, two types of philosophy is very dominant, very visible, again, with this inquiry of Gabriel Marcel. Like that reflection, you see, primary and secondary, analytic and synthetic. That philosophy can be divided, Marcel says, into something static, into thought that already has been taught, systems, philosophical systems, and very dynamic philosophy, thinking thought. Thought, idea, is thinking itself, realizes itself. It's alive. Therefore, idea of being and having are the legitimate ways of philosophical inquiry for Gabriel Marcel. Being and having can work together, does not have to be in opposition for my benefit as a human being, human person. The problem, you see, according to Gabriel Marcel, might be an entity or situation that I am not involved necessarily, whereas mystery demanding always my involvement. And I would like to quote from Gabriel Marcel again, how beautifully he stresses beautiful correlation between problem and mystery. When I am dealing with a problem, I am trying to discover a solution.
I am trying to discover a solution that can become a common property, that consequently can, at least in theory, be rediscovered by anybody at all. But this idea of validity for anybody at all, or of thinking in general, has less and less application the more deeply one penetrates into the inner courts of philosophy.
And this, my friends, is yet another way of Gabriel Marcel telling us, I believe, that both problem and mystery can be tools of epistemological, philosophical, critical inquiry. They would help us in legitimate ways, very open ways, to get a better and bigger picture of ourselves. Not necessarily, you see, according to Gabriel Marcel's pursuit of critical thinking, of knowledge, not to create philosophical system, but be at ease with philosophical categories as we speak about ourselves, the subject that becomes the object of the inquiry. And then something that Gabriel Marcel offers us as the new metaphysics of hope, I think can be a very important tool for us, people of 21st century, almost groping in darkness in many respects, losing completely the focal point on our purpose, our destiny, and maybe even our humanity, to help us better realize the power of hope in progress. What is so unique to Gabriel Marcel and his quest for that new metaphysics of hope is the idea that I do not have hope. I am hope. We are hope. And also the same may be said about belief. I do not have belief or faith. We are belief. I am faith. It's realized as I live in me. It's not something that I necessarily possess. It is something that helps me to realize myself much better. Opinion, conviction, and belief in the philosophy of Gabriel Marcel are categories, are something that, as difficult as to go through some of the words, ideas, and definitions of the philosopher, would at the end help us to see or answers better the question about who am I? What is the definition of the human being, human person? Hope is that which allows me not to despair, gives me strength to live, to create myself or co-create myself with the Absolute, with Almighty God, Almighty Father. And then hope, in that new metaphysics of hope proposed by Gabriel Marcel, is not Stoic hope, is not Stoicism. It's something very vibrant and very dialectic with despair, desperation, both. When I despair, hope realizes itself in my life and gives me strength to overcome the desperation. And while I am hoping for less and less despair. My hope is, my friends, that after today's episode, bringing you a little bit closer the person and the philosophy of Gabriel Marcel, you would realize that only because he is unknown in English-speaking world audience, like here in the United States of America, philosophers like him or his contemporaries like Emmanuel Levinas, or maybe Emmanuel Mounier, as we now call him, father of personalism, movement that is an offshoot of that Christian Catholic metaphysics of hope of Gabriel Marcel, can be a tool, help, and tremendous library for us, people of the 21st century, to speak more eloquently and understand better all the treasury of our faith and tradition. Friends, if you enjoyed this episode about New Metaphysics of Hope of Gabriel Marcel, maybe I can propose that we will talk about Emmanuel Levinas next time, also French philosopher of the Jewish faith this time, that tries to reconcile the horrors of the Second War and Holocaust and genocide with existence of God and the questions like why innocent people suffer. I hope to see you next time with our next episode of Jesus Meets Aristotle.